So, as I was saying a year and a half ago, we very much appreciate your involvement and all of you coming tonight. Welcome to the Orange County Historical Society. This is the beginning of our 102nd year, which is certainly it has been a strange couple of years here, and we appreciate so many of you sticking with us and attending Zoom meetings and emailing and participating online and continuing to keep the society active and doing what it does, which is collect, share, and better understand the history of Orange County. And we haven't stopped doing that, and our volunteers have continued to be great, going in and working in our archives and on the various projects we have going. And I'm getting submissions now from people who've been home writing for a new journal, which I think will be a big toe buster version to make up for some lost time. And so things are going well for us in a somewhat crazy world. So glad to see you all here. I can't tell you how glad I am to be among all of you friends again. This is it's just, you know, what I have looked forward to this for so long. I want to make a quick set of announcements about some upcoming programs, because it turns out we are going to keep doing this. So in October next month, Chris Farron, who's a native of Olinda and is a docent at the Olinda Oil Museum of Brea, will be coming and speaking about the history of Olinda and its pioneers. And he's an excellent speaker. We also, on November 11th, our speaker will be Kathy Shea from Huntington Beach, and she'll be talking about, of all things, the history of the Seabreeze Pet Cemetery. I know that sounds odd, but trust me, you'll want to be here for that one. On November 13th, just a couple days later, we will be having our next history hike. And yes, this is the history hike we had already scheduled back 2 years ago, and we had to cancel at some of the last minute as all the lockdowns started in, and no one quite knew what was going on. And so what we're doing is we've sent out the notice to all of those who were registered for the hike back then. So they've got first dibs on getting in, and there's a limited number of spaces. We don't need a huge mob. But we're going to, and then once we know how many of those folks are going to be signed back up, then we will be opening it up to our members and membership in general. So the hike is going to be out to, for those of you who remember the Portola tour we did, the bus tour, this is sort of a continuation of that, and it is in honor of Phil Briganti. And we'll be going out to the village site, the Juaneño village site of Alauna, which is on the Trabuco, Arroyo Trabuco. So we had a bus stop there on the tour where we all got out and we walked out onto the Arroyo, and Eric and Phil pointed out the different sites, but we're going to be going down into the village site, hiking out to the campsite, and there's actually 2 legs to the tour. So the first leg will be hiking through the Arroyo, down past the creek, and over this village land, and this is part of the Portola route, which we were not able to really do that day, other than just to kind of point it out. And then the second leg will take us out to the top, and the second leg is optional. You can sign up for one and not the other. You can back out at the last minute, because the second leg is the one that's really got the elevation, because it gets you up to the top of Lookout Hill, which is where the scouts from the Portola expedition went up to the top of the hill and were able to figure out their location. Remember, they didn't know where they were, they didn't know this land, and all they had were the maps of the coastline that had been done for them by ships sailing by. And once they got up on top of the hill, they could see some of the coastline and enough of the shape that they had a sense of where they were. So it's a historic site also. It's the harder part of the hike of the two. So you'll have the option there as to if you want to do both parts or just the first part. But watch for that soon. In December, we have our annual show and tell, so you can be setting aside any interesting Orange County curios, bits and pieces that help tell a story, artifacts that help tell a story about Orange County's past, and come up and give us a little talk about what that is, just a few minutes each. Always a fun event. In January, Paul Spitzeri will be back from the Homestead Museum to tell us another one of his true life crime stories from Orange County's past. This is about A. Otis Birch, as he says, the strange saga of Santa Ana's oil tycoon. And then in February, Mark Zambrano gave us a great talk on the history of surfing in Huntington Beach at our History Roundup event at the Heritage Museum a few years ago. We'll be back to talk about Duke Kahanamoku's time in Orange County. So, and he's got a lot gathered up on that subject, and he's an excellent speaker. So that's a little of what we have coming up in this coming season, and we hope you will all join us for that. And if you're not already a member, I certainly encourage you, if you enjoy the evening and the company, I certainly encourage you to sign up as a member. We have some of our newsletters in the back. There's membership forms on the back. You can fill that out. Lynn and Monica in the back have more, and they can take your membership back there. And we also, of course, have some of our past publications there. I think by our next meeting, we're going to have another whole set of publications for sale that you haven't seen out on those tables before. So that will mix things up a little bit, and there should be some fun things in there as well. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker this evening. When it comes to government and politics, California has, of course, always marched to its own drum, a process which continues even this week. Cal State University Fullerton Emeritus Professor Dr. Barbara Stone knows more about that turbulent political history than anyone I've ever met. She taught political science at Fullerton for 32 years and served as department chair. She's a former member of California's Little Hoover Commission and the Governor's Commission on Educational Quality. She's author of California Politics, Supplement for American Government, and co-author of California's Political Process, and has written, of course, many scholarly journal articles. Dr. Stone is, and I say this honestly, I think I mentioned this in these letters, she is one of the main reasons I went to Cal State Fullerton. I heard her speak several times in the community when I was in high school. I was so impressed. I thought, wow, someone this bright, this, who knows this much, who shares this much information with, her audience every time she gets in front of a podium. Wow, if Cal State Fullerton has professors like that, that's where I want to be. Even though I wasn't a poli-sci major, she impressed me so much, and she still does. Her depth of knowledge and her ability to entertain and educate has always been wonderful. I'm so pleased that she's joining us. It's a special meeting, which, as I say, marks our return to whatever counts as normal in this state. And with that, thank you, Dr. Stone. Take it away.
The last time I saw Chris, I had blonde hair. So times have moved on. I'm happy to come talk about historical politics in California. I'm going to do it in a sort of idiosyncratic way. I believe there are a couple of places where major things happen that change some directions. And I'll be honest, folks, I'm not a historian. I'm a political scientist, if the word scientist goes with political. And, well, I've always been a little embarrassed by that. But when we get there, I am interested in yesterday to the extent it helps me understand today. And in this state, believe me, it does. Such fun. Chris specifically mentioned, of course, since I'm in Orange County, I might talk about Orange County. And you guys will come into this eventually, but you're sort of latecomers to politics. I was looking at some stuff in 1950, which to me doesn't seem all that long ago. What was in Orange County? Orange trees, lima bean fields, all that kind of stuff. What was not here was the Santa Ana Freeway. And once that happened, the county changed, the county evolved, and from the date 1950, where I'm sort of making fun, but to the time you get into the 60s and particularly the 70s, you guys are driving stuff. But we have to get there through some earlier times to make it work. Okay, with all that. You know, of course, that the United States stayed the United States because of a civil war. After which, unless you were in the South, nobody would be a Democrat. And if you were in the South, nobody would be a Republican. I don't know about all of you, I had a very Southern grandmother that went to her grave believing Abraham Lincoln was a war criminal. And I had a grandfather on the other side who believed he was the greatest icon and hero ever in American history, who cared about George Washington. So that was an interesting way to go. But we are California. We are, by the way, just as an aside, to any of you who are political, it took them over 100 years to figure out that Abraham Lincoln was dead, and they really didn't like the Democrats very much. If you're not political, just sort of let that comment go. But in terms of party politics, it was a big deal. All right, so California was Republican. What does that mean? To be honest, a party is just an organization. And it adds up to people who are voters in the party, people who are activists in the party, and the people who are the donors and big-time supporters of said party. In California, I'm going to say in the early days, certainly up to the early 20th century, the Republican Party ran everything. But the Republican Party was run by special interests, primarily the railroads. In fact, I have it from some people who had it from relatives who knew that the railroads and other interests were going to see to it that the state was run in their interests. However, none of those people would want to be a grubby politician, right? So they didn't run. Leland Stanford, Samuel Huntington never ran for governor. They just controlled the governors. And you know what way they did it is funny. Go back sometime if you're interested. Look at the listing of California governors, say in the end of the 19th century. They're all one-term governors. Honey, if I'm running you, I don't want you suddenly thinking you're important. And you call yourself governor for a few years, and you might think that, right? But so that's how we control it. Now, how did you get all this done? The answer is, in those days, just as at the national level, candidates were nominated by party convention. Whoever owned the party convention owned the party, and your interest did. I mentioned the railroads because they were a truly big deal. Also, was particularly by the time you swap over into the early 20th century, you had oil interests. Chevron was active here for many, many decades, still is. We had Union Oil, we had other oil companies, they were big interests. Interestingly enough, somewhere in here I have to include I have to include the press. And I mean the Hearst newspapers, and I mean really and truly, as you got on a bit, the LA Times. I can tell you a story. You'll find I love stories, particularly when I know something about them. Well, you know, sometimes you just read, and I don't know if I know that or not. I know from a person who was in this meeting that there was a group who was trying to find a Republican nominee, or Republican person, to run for an open United States Senate seat in, I'm going to get this right, 1949. The seat came up in 1950. 50. And they were committed to finding a Republican because they believed that a Republican could win. The wannabe Republican candidates were all going, no, 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 we can't beat Manchester voting. Have any of you ever been to Descanso Gardens? Okay, that's built on his property. He was a newspaper publisher, he was well known, he was well liked. Nobody thought they could beat Manchester voting. The trio in the room at this meeting were certain that the Democratic primary would not go that way, that it was going to go to Helen Gahagan Douglas, a different woman, a member of Congress. To any of you who like a little sleaze, she's rumored to have been a girlfriend of Lyndon Johnson's. I don't know. Ladies, that's hard to imagine if you actually stop thinking about it. Think about it. Anyway, who was in that room at that time? So we're talking mid-century, 20th century. Was a representative of the railroads, a representative of the oil companies, and Kyle Palmer, who was the political editor of the LA Times. And they saw it as their job to produce the Republican who was going to be, of course, the next senator. By the way, you should ask me, how do I know that? Thank you. Because my grandpa didn't lie to me. And he was the oil company representative. So you see, one of the things you're going to get as we go through this a bit is, I come from a political family. My grandfather was a lawyer, but his big clients and personal friends were oil interests. My father was a Republican leader in the state legislature. I taught about it. Easier to do, teach than do. What is it? Those who can do, those, oh, never mind. So you're going to get some of the stuff where I think I know some stuff instead of just reading books. So let's go back to right before the 20th century. The railroads ran the state through the Republican Party. A progressive, that's a word you know now, movement took over the country. Or it didn't take over it, but it was major out there, came particularly from the Midwest, and it reached California. We had our progressive movement. It was, by the way, it showed up as something called the Lincoln-Roosevelt League. Roosevelt was not Franklin. This is too early. That's Teddy. All right? So the Lincoln-Roosevelt League, its front man you may have heard of was Hiram Johnson, who became governor and then eventually senator from California. It's important what went on then, because it tells you, in fact, who mentioned the recall? It explains what's happening right now, well over 100 years later. They were against the big interests who ran the state through the party. They could not hit the big interests, but they sure as heck could hit the party. And the purpose of the progressive reforms was to destroy political parties in California. How did they do that? By returning power to the people. How did they do that? By the way, one of the first things they did was by having direct primaries. We, the people, select the people who will be in the runoff for everything like governor, not party conventions. To make sure the parties didn't pollute local government, we went to nonpartisan offices in local government. If you all vote for your city council, you vote for your unimportant things like tax collectors and things like that, you will notice there's never a D or an R after their names. Those are nonpartisan. They intended it to be that way because they didn't want the parties to have much input. All kinds of other things and rules that you probably wouldn't be real interested in, but the big ones were that we need to really and truly get a hold of these people running our state And so what they did was put in the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. And right now, there are observers out there that I find hilarious, because they are going, the recall is a threat to our democracy. No, honey, it is our democracy. And democracy, by the way, is direct rule by the people. All right? When you elect officials and they're supposed to do it all, that's a republic. When we all vote on the laws and we vote on everything, that's democracy. So what it did, they did have, you still had the legislature, you still had the governor, but they made it so we, the people, could override them if we wished. We could make the laws if they wouldn't make them. That's the initiative process. If they passed something we didn't like, we could have a referendum on it, where we can overturn it. Unless it passes the legislature by 2/3, but that's not necessary here. And if we really didn't like them, we could throw the bums out of office. We didn't have to wait for an election. And you're going to look at me and go, oh, but Dr. Stone, you should have a good reason. Oh, don't give me that. If you don't like him and you just want him out of there, that doesn't violate anything. My favorite, and this was some years ago, was in the city of Stockton. They recalled a councilman. And I don't remember what they put on the ballot, but the reason they were telling everybody you've got to vote against, get this guy out of here who won, was it was a black district and he couldn't be black because he had blue eyes. Some of you think I made that up, don't you? What of course it actually happened was a longtime councilman had known he couldn't lose, had not bothered campaigning, and son of a something, he lost. So as soon as the 6 months were up, he ran a recall, got the guy out, he had the votes. But this is part of our history, and for what it's worth, it really and truly was intended as a way to basically destroy parties in the state. Okay, let's move along. Everybody, however, getting elected stayed Republicans. In fact, even during the Depression in the 1930s, we elected one guy one time. His name was Culbert Olson, who served one term. This is when Roosevelt and the New Deal, okay, were dominating the country. We had one-term Democrat. That was it. That was the end of it. Because, by the way, they did wonderful things. Most of you aren't going to think this is cool, but I think it's cool. We wanted, the people putting this together did not want people to know what party people belonged to. So you had party primaries, but you could not put party identification in the people running in the primary, and you had what we called cross-filing. That means, let's assume the wild Republican, Chris over here, is running in the Republican primary for something. Also in the Republican primary for somebody is this nutty Democrat back there, John Morlock. And I'm in there too, and I'm some kind of Republican. No, I'm a Democrat. We're two Democrats, he's one Republican, all right? And we're in the Democrat primary. Nobody told them who the Democrats were. And if Chris was around, and people knew him, he had a reasonable chance of winning the Democrat primary. Now, the biggest one I ever know of, the name Earl Warren, I assume means something to you. If it doesn't, it soon will. When he was running for Attorney General, he won the Democrat primary for Attorney General. By the way, it's wonderful. When the Democrats finally got some power back, and we'll get there shortly, in the 1950s, one of the first things they did was change that so that you put D and R, no R ever wanted D primary again, once you could tell the difference. Anyhow, that's where it left it. I'm going to get to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that's probably where I'm going to stop, so anything you'd like to talk about at the end is fine, but it gets complicated. I'm going to make the argument, by the way, in terms of our parties in the state, and people don't usually talk about this, But two events about a decade apart changed the complexion of each party in different directions. If you were a Democrat in those days, in the 40s and 50s, it was pretty depressing. The activists found each other in 1952. And how they found each other was through the candidacy of Adlai Stevenson. For those of you who don't follow this stuff, Adlai Stevenson was the Democratic nominee for President of the United States in '52. He lost to Dwight David Eisenhower. But he was a man who projected a certain ideologies too strong, but set of liberal beliefs. He looked kind of like a professor, kind of bald, kind of serious, holes in the bottom of his shoes. At least once they took a picture of him that way. I still think he meant it to be seen, but I give him that credit. But you had what amounted to an ideological Democrat. And the particularly younger, enthusiastic Democrats in the state worked their little tails off for Adlai Stevenson. He lost, and then we went, oh, but you and you and you and you all found each other. Why should we stop, you know? And that became the basis, and they certainly weren't the only ones. They formed the CDC, for any of you who are into this, and to this day, the CDC is a party auxiliary, which tends to be the ideologically liberal side. But you had that movement going. By the way, the reverse happened with the other party about 10 years later. It was called Barry Goldwater. The Republican Party in California, if you define it by its elected officials, was what today we would call very moderate Republicans. All right? Elected 3 times was Earl Warren as governor of California. You all know he became a Supreme Court justice. I have a gossipy story about how that happened, but we won't do that. Somebody who should know, and I can tell you where I know this from. My grandfather was a good friend of Earl Warren's. They were close personal friends. And to get Warren's support for the presidency, Eisenhower promised him the first opening on the Supreme Court. You should say, where does the story come from? Warren to my grandfather. So maybe someone lied to somebody, I don't know. But the bottom line was when it came up the Chief Justice, that the Eisenhower people went, no, 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 no. This was a political deal. They said, no, not the Chief Justice. And Governor Warren went, sorry, a deal's a deal, and that's how you got Chief Justice Earl Warren. He was going to be on the court, and it was a straight-up political deal. And obviously the man had tremendous abilities to convince others and bring them along. But Earl Warren was prototypical of Republicans through this period. His successor was a guy named Goodwin Knight. Yeah. Goody Knight. Can you imagine naming your kid Goodwin if Knight's the last name? By the way, he's a hilarious guy. I liked him. He once told me my grandfather was the smartest man he ever met. Talking to Goody, I believe him. And he was a popular guy, interesting. Well, I don't need to go there. Also in this mix was a man named Bill Nolan, who was one of the senators from California, and there was Thomas Keeple, who was the other senator from California, who in this period became the Republican, I think he was the whip in the United States Senate. That matters. Have I mentioned you have now a motivated Democrat base, plus a changing demographic? And Orange County is still a bunch of lima beans and hay. Don't let it, it's going to make a difference 20 years later, but not then. The Republicans, knowing that they were in complete ascendancy, did what parties do. By the way, both parties do this. Go talk to activists, and either one, and they'll go, oh, my people just fight with each other all the time, and the other party is together. No, honey, none of them ever are. And in this case, the Republicans formed a circular firing squad. The biggest one was that Bill Noland, who was a senator, wished to be president. In those days, we believed that being a senator was not a good way to get to be president. You needed to have run something. So Bill Noland decided he was going to be governor, and Goody could run for his Senate seat. But Goody didn't want to run for the Senate. Goody liked being governor. They dried up all of Goody's money, okay? And so Goody ran for senator, Nolan ran for governor, and Goody spent the entire campaign telling the public of California what a no-good jerk Bill Nolan was. All right? Yeah. So guess what? Neither one of them won. In fact, for those of you who have any funny history here, there was a prominent Democrat, his name was Alan Cranston, but he was what you called a two-time loser. He had, run statewide, and he had won. So, no, that's Tommy Kuegel. Scratch it, don't go there. Let's talk about Alan Cranston, whom they permitted to run against Tommy Kuegel, whom nobody could defeat, right? Just a couple years later. Couldn't lose. To this day, I don't know why he did it. Does the name Pierre Salinger mean anything to any of you? Okay, John Kennedy's press secretary, who decided he was going to be and was appointed to a vacancy in the Senate, U.S. Senate from California. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, he was not a resident of California. He moved out, and his appointment was challenged in the Senate on the basis that he doesn't meet California law and therefore should not be seated. Because you do know both houses of Congress are the ultimate arbiter of who's seated in their house. All the Democrats voted to seat him. All the Republicans voted not to seat him except two, one of whom was Tom Kuegel from California. Tom Kuegel came up for re-election relatively soon. The Republicans were going to punish him. Now, I knew all kinds of people who never thought he could lose, but then he needed to know we were mad at him, right? And so we voted for someone else in the primary. Somebody else was a man named Max Rafferty, who was the superintendent of public instruction, who my memory tells me got in a car accident there, so I don't remember. Anyhow, Max Rafferty certainly could not be senator. Tommy Kuegel was unbeatable, except Max Rafferty beat Tommy Kuegel in the Republican primary. That's where Alan Cranston comes in. Since, remember my stories back about the people trying to find someone to run for Senate? Everyone in this case knew that everybody knew that Kuegel couldn't be beaten, so take old Alan Cranston, who lost a couple of times, and that's okay, he's a good old guy. He became United States Senator from California. So, it's called boom, 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 and that's the way it goes. Come in here, the 1970s. Let me make sure I have my dates right. No. I don't know about all of you. I have a few dates I have firmly in my mind, but I have to hang everything else on those few dates. I remember when I had history teachers who used to ask me to reproduce dates of this, that, and the other. You gotta be kidding. But anyway. Dick Nixon, who by the way is an Orange County boy, moved off to Whittier. That's where I live. Went to college at Whittier College. I think he went to law school at Duke, served in World War II, came back to Whittier, was an attorney, ran for Congress. By the way, just in passing, because I cared about who made the decision, I was telling you the cute little story about the three guys finding a candidate. The candidate they found for Senate was Dick Nixon. who was like their fifth choice. But he was willing to take the chance. All right. So he was Eisenhower's vice president. He lost by a little bit for the presidency to John Kennedy. Many, not most, Republicans active in that era still believe dead people in Chicago and Texas are who did it. I don't know. By the way, see, nothing's new. Think about it. Out of all of this, Nixon sat out, waited, ran again in '68, and was elected. By the way, probably luck played in there too, because if you will recall, he defeated Hubert Humphrey, who had been Lyndon Johnson's vice president. And Johnson didn't run, Humphrey did. Humphrey almost beat Nixon, didn't matter, Nixon became president. Nixon served 4 years, was re-elected. I think he won every state but one, right?
Right.
Let me repeat it. He won every state but one. Nobody on this planet thought George McGovern was going to defeat Dick Nixon in 1972. Unless you were named Mrs. McGovern. I don't even know if there was one, but you get the general thought. Were any of you active in politics in this county in that era? You had what were called the creeps. That's the Committee for the Re-election of the President. Nixon was so obviously going to win. They swept through this county, they swept through this state, they swept all over the nation, and sucked up money. Sort of like Gavin Newsom just did. Huge amounts of money. That left, of course, no money for the other Republicans running for things, did it? People did not like the creeps. Nixon won big. They had so much money, that they had all these people they hired, and what were they supposed to do? For some reason I have never understood, they decided they needed to know what the Democrat National Committee was doing. And so they broke into their offices in the Watergate complex. Never understood. Who cared what they were doing? But you had too much money, too many people, and they thought it was cute. I won't go into the details of what went on. A whole bunch of people I went to college with were in that administration, and a few of them didn't go to prison. Most of them did. Okay, but the grand story was that in 1973, Dick Nixon had to resign. Why am I talking about this when I'm talking about California politics? Because the impact here was unbelievable. And it changed all kinds of trajectories. For the 1974 election, the Democrat nominee for governor was a person by the name of Edmund G. Brown Jr. You know him as Jerry. He had been a community college trustee and then a Secretary of State. This was in his about-to-be Governor Moonbeam time. People did not love him. I will admit, and it could get in all kinds of things, I was at that time working on the Hugh Flournoy campaign. Hugh was the Republican nominee for governor. I worked with the pollster. We had an excellent pollster. His name was Dick Worthland. I say that only because I believe his numbers. Nobody liked Jerry. Hugh was winning. Oh my God, we're winning, yeah, gonna be a governor. And then Jerry Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. It was around the 1st of October in an election year, we dropped 20 points. Almost made it back up, but didn't. And that launched Jerry Brown, and as you know, the trajectory of the state, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, have been that way ever since. Where do you come in, Orange County? Oh, boys and girls, this is where you enter from my point of view. the field big time. Because, okay, Republicans were pounded. I'm telling you, our seats around here, your seats around, I was at Fullerton. Democrats won all kinds of seats. They just won them, congressional, legislative, whatever. It was a seriously bad time if you were a Republican. And then came Howard Jarvis. It was called Proposition 13. Everybody I knew deeply involved came out of this county, right here. Because by then the bean fields had given way to housing tracts. And Republican infrastructure happened. Do any of you know what the Lincoln Club is? It's a group of high-powered Republican donors who were put together in support of Dick Nixon. By the way, for those who don't know, I was told at the time, and I still believe, it was actually put together to get John Schmitz, and they did. John Schmitz was a very conservative congressman from here who did not like Dick Nixon going to China. All right, figured he was selling out to the commies. And he said it loudly, often, every place, and he did not win the nomination. The bottom line is that Prop 13 was popular politically in the state at a level it is difficult to communicate. For any of you who don't know what I'm talking about, this is the one that limits your property tax increases as long as you don't move. And now we can even move if we're old. And actually we can move multiple times if we're old. No, we can't. Yeah. The bottom line out of all of that is we had a bunch of what we call Prop 13 babies. And some of them were. They were the people who truly backed 13 in this county. Some were big money people, others were activists. A number of people who were elected for the first time because they believed in keeping your property taxes low came out of that. That's that whole class. Kurt Tringle, Frank Hill, who's about to go back to prison. I mean, our politicians are more fun, but you have to laugh, you know? Otherwise you go, oh my God, let's go back to the railroads. For a while, my dears, in Republican politics, Orange County ruled the state. And while you didn't go back to the days of Republicans running the state, it was pretty heavy. By the way, other things were happening over here. One of the big ones out of this era was we gave public employees the right to unionize. I remember in the 70s when, you know, our primary and secondary schools, up to that point, they had not been able to form unions. Under Jerry Brown and when the legislature was Democrat, they were permitted to. Does everyone in this room understand how that's changed the politics of this state? Okay? So all kinds of stuff happened in the 70s. Favoring both parties. Okay, we need to wind this up. And to this day, Orange County still is regarded as the bastion of conservatism. I don't care if Lou Correa is elected. Nah, I don't need to go there. I was about to be very, no, I'm going to be very mean about some people and I don't need to. At this, yes I do. Well, I'll tell you why. Have I mentioned that back in the day, whoever they happened to be, Republicans dominated the state up through the 1950s? Then you probably, with a glitch here and there, had a period where it was pretty competitive. And then it's been boom! You have to think about why every one of us is going to have our own opinions. In this case, I will cite this as opinion, all right? You had changing demographics. You had, how am I going to put this? A Republican Party and Orange County, you were responsible for it more than most, that turned inward. So they spent their efforts competing in safe Republican districts. They evolved a stable of consultants who were wonderful about destroying other Republicans when you're arguing about who's the most conservative, but that doesn't speak to your broader electorate. And some other stuff happened, and eventually you are now back to where this is a one-party state. But you know what? We never quite stay any place. We really don't. I will make this last comment about this week. Recall election, right? This state is at a place where if only Republicans had wanted to recall Governor Newsom, it wouldn't be happening. I won't ask you your party affiliation. I assume I have members of both parties. And I probably even have some that goes, you told me party's evil, I believe it, I belong to no party. It's called, yeah, no party preference is what we call it now. It used to be declined to state. I used to say it was done somethings, but that's different. There are not enough Republicans to have made this recall a go. So if any of you have the ear of Governor Newsom, you should go tell him that, Gavin Darling, you are the sitting governor in the state where your party blows the other people away. And yet the numbers just on the recall petition say a whole lot of your people are mad at you. A whole lot of declined estates are mad at you. And you need to clean up your act or you boy may not survive a year from now. But this is California. Everybody goes, oh, how ridiculous, we're the lands of the, no honey, this has been us for over 100 years. You don't like them, toss them. Don't like the law, toss it. You want your own law? By the way, those have to be paid for by money people, so they're frequently different. But when you get around to it, California is never boring. And I say, I grew up with it my whole life. I think I understand it until the next thing that happens, and I know I don't. But I don't know if this suited your needs. It's sort of a look into one person's backward looking. But we're a special place. I don't have my moving van yet. Besides, it costs too much. Anyway, thank you so much, folks. I hope
There's a way to turn this thing back on, but I'm not sure what that is. Thank you so much for that. Would you be willing to take some questions as well, if we have some?
I'm shy and retired.
I can tell. We can tell. Or a shrinking violet.
No, seriously, if someone wants to bring something up, challenge, question, ask for expansion, challenge something, don't tell me I don't know what I'm doing, but you get the challenge.
While they're thinking of questions, I'll just mention one thing about Kuechel. You were talking about it. The Kuechels and the Kuchels were a big family in Orange. They were from Orange, and what I've always heard from the old timers in Orange was that it really was Kuchel originally, but you know the Kuechels thought Kuechel sounded much fancier, and you know you can run for office with a better sounding name. It didn't maybe sound quite as, I don't know if they thought it didn't sound as Germanic during wartime or what, but you know, local boy made semi-good on occasion.
Oh, he
So,
made,
yes,
no,
yes.
he made really good.
Yeah.
Then he made a mistake
Yeah.
that people didn't forgive him for.
I didn't get the memo, but could you explain to me, in a recall such as we're in the midst of, recall yes or no, if the governor is out, why isn't the lieutenant governor moving up.
That seems logical,
No.
but it's not true. Because, and actually the easiest way I can explain it is that, remember, this was set up, and they haven't changed the rules on this particularly, a little around the edges, that you're gonna throw the bum out. No, we're gonna throw the bum out, right? And we should get to choose, we the people, through democracy, should get to choose the successor. Not somebody elected essentially at the same time, the same way as the person we're tossing. Okay? It follows the logic. Whether it's something you think should be done or not is irrelevant. I'll be honest, at this point, if you made me guess, I will guess the recall will not be successful. If it is, you'll get a Republican as a replacement, and I assure every person in this room, because I have secret inside information, the lieutenant governor's already talking to people about getting to run against that Republican a year from November, if that's the way it comes out, because the odds of such a person holding the office for more than a year aren't good. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but not good. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the hearse and made reference to Chandler's and Times, and we had R.C. Hoyle's here, the Register. Was television the point where national media gained more political power in California?
Eventually. I'm going to say that eventually that's true, but remember, in terms of politics, now, I remember watching the first televised national convention. Oh dear. And it took quite a while for that to catch on. And if you wanted news, particularly local news, particularly anything reasonable for decades, you got it from the newspaper. You had changeover in leadership of the papers, which also contributed to this. I think it would have eventually happened, but even there, for example, I take the Los Angeles Times. Why do I take the Los Angeles Times? I admit I ignore their recommendations. I don't care who they think I should vote for. But they cover local stuff. And that's the only place I really get it. Channel 5 just doesn't do it. So that there's still a place there. But you're right, it's changed. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Why do we honestly need a political editor of one paper telling us who's going to be the person we're going to have for a choice? Yes?
Sorry, you had mentioned that there was an entity trying to destroy the party system early on. Could you reiterate whom or what it was trying to do that?
Say it, would you lift your mask?
Yeah, sure. You had mentioned early on that there was an entity trying to destroy the party system. Could you reiterate whom or what that was?
Certainly.
Thank you.
These are going to be, the front organization was something called the Lincoln Roosevelt League. It was an offshoot of the National Progressive Movement, and to make it go in California, the lead person was Hiram Johnson. Although nothing I've ever read suggests he thought of this, he just was smart enough to see it. Yes, sir?
I noticed in the beginning you emphasized that party is just an organization, and then you sort of started talking about the evolution of control of politics in California. So would you equate most of the shift in who controls California to the organizational processes of each party, or is it ideological?
Actually, that's a really good question, and I admit I just skipped a step in here. Because I will argue, if anyone in the room wishes to argue with me, you may. That 100 years ago, the progressives were very successful. I don't care what other laws they've made, that the party organization is virtually useless. And as to go back to who was asking about the recall, how often do you see the Republican Party talking about it? And if they did, would you care? Tell your story that's true, because even if later you change the rules a little bit, for example, the parties had no source of income. So everybody who had any money got in the habit of giving it to the candidates. So now, well, the parties can endorse, right? So surely you want to give money to us. Why would I waste the money? I give it to the candidates I like. That's a weakness in the party. I don't think that's ever gone away. But the two parties are still there. The Democrats established a little more functional organization more than a few years back. But it's still, let me give you an example. And yes, ideology drives things on both sides. All right? So just some years ago, many years ago, I believe it was Governor Dianne Feinstein ran for it. It was many years ago, but not that many. She's still alive, right? Okay. She and her people needed, or they thought they needed, a video of her standing up for California. All right? Standing up for principle when others rejected it. So they went to a large group. The mayor went, I am in favor of the death penalty. Do you understand at that point in time, boo, hiss, throw anything I can throw at you, just, get off the stage. That was the Democratic State Party, she said that to. All right? So one, talk about your ideology, she knew they were going to boo her, and two, there was no price to pay for having her party reject her. And in fact, prove she was a woman we all could support. If that makes any sense. I mean, I'm talking around the issue, but I will end up saying in California, parties are unbelievably weak, and they were meant to be. Yes, sir.
On that, can you say what, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, just.
I'm
Sorry.
old and deaf.
Yeah. Can you, I know it's a little more recent, but could you talk about the impact of the top two primary and how that's impacted recent history?
He's asking me to make something up, which is, no, which is what do I believe is the impact of the top two primary. In fact, at one level, it fits with the way I believe our state has been since the early 1900s. Tremendously weakens parties because most districts, and no matter how you draw them, are safe for one party or the other. And so always the real election was in the primary of the dominant party. Let's just use an example. And it's a matter of how the people want to see it. He's a prominent Democrat, you're a prominent Democrat, he's a prominent Democrat, she's a Republican. In a district that's 2/3 Democrat. If you have a straight up party primary, one of you three, the election will be decided in your primary. But she will be able to organize whatever Republicans are around, who might believe what she says instead of what you crazy people say. Seriously, if you want party building, you have to have a candidate out front that has your label attached. Now, that's interesting. I'll give you an example from a few years ago. I'm a very transactional person, all right? And she's fine, I like her. But I want to have something to say about which of you three is actually elected. So I will change it. I will vote in your primary. And in fact, how many of you remember we had a transition where we didn't do away with the primaries, it wasn't yet top two, but we let you vote in whatever primary you want?
Yeah.
Larry, half my colleagues in my department, none of whom were Republicans, voted in the Republican primary for the assembly that year. Because they knew in the general they'd vote for the Democrat, which was one of their colleagues, but they cared which Republican it was going to be. So they crossed, yeah, they did. So they crossed over, and people like them clearly made a difference. And then people went, oh, well, then let's just do it top two. In a funny way, that's part of the way we do it to go parties who want some. Now, having said that, 1, 2, 3 is top two, right? You're all running, you all organize. She's running. There probably are enough to make her second after you guys split it.
Yeah.
So practically, I don't think it's changed it as much as it once did, but it makes it harder for the parties.
And also, I think, at least in this state, in the recent history, it has resulted in probably more to Democrats than to Republicans, but that could be different for district elections.
Yes. If that makes any sense. Yes?
Dr. Stone, you mentioned collective bargaining
Yeah.
briefly. Could you elaborate on the impact that has had on the state of California?
Could I elaborate on the impact collective bargaining has had in the public sector?
Please.
Opinion. Informed opinion. It has concentrated an incredible number of dollars in a relatively small number of union leaders who have a symbiotic relationship with the people who employ them and who sit at the other side of the bargaining table, which will be your elected officials. And you get into, you give me more money, I give you workers and voters, you give me more money. Give you, I think I read it right quite recently. SEIU is a general union, has a whole lot of state workers. They just had an election for their head. The head of the union, the old one, had committed $1 million to Gavin Newsom for his recall from the union coffers. Another person ran against her, going, no, no, no. Our money should be for our members and things that matter to us. And he defeated her. And the state gave the union a much bigger contract. And as far as I know, they're now out walking the precincts forward. That is in fact where you get, I mean, it's unions generally, but state government employees specifically, you want to talk about your ground game, you talk about your troops. It's a tremendous advantage. I just changed the way the world
Would
goes.
you say this is being demonstrated in the city of Santa Ana's police department at this very time?
It might be. I can only talk in generalities. I mean, it's there. Actually, where I first saw it, and then I'll be quiet because some people would probably like to go home. I pay attention to education, and I believe with all my heart have I mentioned I was a teacher? And I worked for the state. But you see, I'm a really bad example because they came quite late to letting us bargain, right? And we voted for a union, and I was a good person, and I went, this person is going to represent me, so I will join the union, these people. How many of you belong to unions? Just, yeah. What would you do if your union went and bargained away everything? Longer to tenure, you name it, longer office hours, and in return got a promise that your district, in this case your board of trustees, would ask the legislature for more money. So I'm a bad one to talk to about public employee unions because I was represented by the worst on the face of the earth. That's actually the point of all that. My apologies if any of you. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say, the union over the last decade, 2 decades, have done wonderful things for poor people. My father died at 94,
mean public or private?
Okay.
I'm not talking about those people.
Well, you know what, it's not different. A union, their beliefs and where they started expanded to teachers and CEOs or wherever. So it is not, to me, I'm insulted by what you just
Okay,
said.
and that's
And
fair.
I have three sisters that were teachers.
Let me
And they're all Democrats and they all vote union. And they've done wonderful things for
Let
them.
me try
And
something.
teachers
I
especially.
I
Maybe
assume-
not college, let me finish. Maybe not college, but elementary school, junior high, you know, plumbers, everybody gets paid more money than they do.
Do they teach in city of Los Angeles?
Pardon me? We're talking Orange County here.
Thank you, that's all I want to know. If they were UTLA, you and I would now proceed to have one of the hugest fights you've ever seen in your life. Since the head of that union just said it's not bad that the kids have lost all the learning, but they know what a something is.
No, you know what it is?
No, listen, please, I'm not-
Citizens United is the same thing. Where does that money go? To the pockets of rich people. That's the difference.
We'd have to have another discussion.
Actually, you said it yourself.
Let me try a matter of
You
principle.
said it yourself.
Let me try a matter of principle. A matter of principle that I think you will disagree with me on, but that you could make, I would hope, saying I can see it. If teachers, and that's what you're discussing specifically, wish to unionize, unions bargain over salaries and working conditions. I'm fine with that. Just listen, as long as they cannot buy the people on the other side of the table. I.e., raise the money, do what you want, but you should not be able to contribute to the campaigns of the people who are going to be signing your contract that you're supposedly bargaining over.
Well, just like.
You just should, and that has nothing to do with what you just said, by the way. Nothing. Okay, I would argue, but these people are looking over.
I'm going to break up the fight at this point because we are coming up on 9 o'clock in any case. I appreciate the spirit involved all around. And I want to thank you, Dr. Stone, for a wonderful program and evening and sharing these stories with us. So thank you, and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight here, and thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you next month. And if you are, as I say, if you're not a member and you'd like to get on our mailing list, do see Monica and Lynn in the back. Help yourself to goodies. They're all individually packaged, so you know. Try to keep people from getting too nervous. So, thank you all. We'll see you next month. Welcome back. Welcome back.